Lena Huda has only lived in Australia for a couple of years so far, but has already had more influence here than many achieve in their lifetime. Despite being a busy mother of 4 young children, since arriving here, Lena has thrown herself into full-time advocacy work. She's co-founded 2 organisations, 30 Please and Safe Streets to School. Having grown up in Germany, where she could walk and cycle independently from a young age, Lena assumed that things would be the same for her children here. Despite her shock when arriving in Australia and seeing how unsafe conditions actually are here, she's calmly set about bringing about positive change to her newly adopted homeland. Lena Huda, thank you for being on Influencers.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, you're a mother of 4 children. Is that what motivated you to start doing the work that you've been doing?
Yes, that's absolutely in a certain extent, because I want my kids to grow up in a really great way, but also to leave them a good planet. And I think what probably really was a thing where I thought, I personally have to do something, was when I moved to Australia. People were always telling me about the amazing Australian summers. And when I actually arrived in Australia, we had bushfires. So I was looking outside into the apocalyptic weather, and was a red sky, smoky. And I was like, wow, this is like quite something. Is this going to be the future for our children? So then I thought about what I personally can do to leave them a good planet.
Okay, so we've already established, you just said you came to Australia, and we can tell from your accent that perhaps you weren't born just down the road in the local hospital.
Yeah.
So tell us where you did come from, and tell us a bit about your childhood and growing up.
Yes, so I was born in Germany in the 80s, and I grew up in a very suburban, like, little town in Germany. And the streets, and that's probably also why I'm so interested in what I'm doing about lower speed limits. It was a 30k speed limit in our neighborhood, and that was just meaning I'm one of 4, so we were just playing outside, just being, walking, cycling to school. We only had school very short in the morning in Germany, so we then walked home, and then we just had lunch, and then we just played outside on the street playing tennis, and it was just, cars were just stopping for us. We were just like, cars come, yes, but you go out of the way and cars drive through. And there was just never a problem, basically, in terms of our independence. And later on, the school was a bit further away, so all the children rode to school, and it was just not something we had a second thought about. Traffic was just not something my parents worried about, because we had slow cars around us that were watching out, which is really interesting, because actually Germany is a very car-loving nation. We have so many car makers there. So my town is actually really close to Volkswagen. So a lot of people work for Volkswagen, and a lot of people like cars, but there's a common understanding that children need to be independent. Children need also to be able to get to places, and as they can't drive, there needs to be enough there so that they can walk and ride. And I thought that was really confronting for me when we moved to Australia. I thought it's going to be actually exactly the same, because we moved to this suburban neighborhood, very similar to how, obviously in Germany it's not as beautiful as in Australia, like this kind of landscape and the beach. I didn't have anything like that. And I thought, this neighborhood, that looks the same. My kids are going to be free to go outside, and that's what the kids are going to do in the afternoon. And I was actually really surprised. It's not like that. There's like a thing that kids have to be supervised, and it's not safe for them to ride their bikes through their neighborhoods. And I was actually very surprised, and I was like, why would you be able to drive 50k through this neighborhood? It's like such a strange concept that you go at a speed where you're literally not going to be able to brake if a kid comes and makes a mistake. And I thought that is something that seems to be not really aligned with how the people actually are. Actually, people in Australia, I find they care a lot about children's happiness, and they They like to be outdoors. They like to be active. So why would you create these neighborhoods where, have these fast cars so kids can't actually enjoy it? So that's kind of what really motivated me to really go for the speed limits, because it's such a,
It's interesting
thing.
Hearing your perspective as an outsider, if you like, who's only been here 2 years now.
Yes, yeah.
But before we get into 30 Please, the organisation and the specifics, I just want to roll back to Germany a bit. And I'm sure people watching this will think, wow, only going to school in the morning?
Yeah.
Where was that when I went to school? That seems quite stunning. So you graduated from school, and what did you do next?
Then I moved to Munich, and there I studied mathematics. So I lived there for 5 years. I also spent some time in Spain, actually. And then, and then after that, I moved to London for my first job. And then I stayed there for a long time. That's where I met my Australian husband, and we lived in London for 15 years before he finally convinced me that we should definitely move to Australia. So.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that moving for Australia, because you actually had a very high-flying career, if I can say so. Barclays Bank, and another major. What was
Morgan Stanley was the other one?
Morgan Stanley, yeah. What was the work that you were doing for those organisations?
I was a salesperson for like complex products, and my clients were German banks and asset managers. So the role was, basically they wanted to have this, my team was a team of German speakers who were then, negotiating these trades with institutional clients. And it was a really interesting job. I really enjoyed it because you had to kind of think within, you always needed to think about the legal framework and the tax framework and what your clients want and what is good for your banks, and put that all together. So it was a really interesting.
So we're not talking selling a pack of cornflakes here. I dare say these deals that you were doing had quite a few noughts on the
they were like the biggest one was probably like €1 billion trades, this kind of thing. So they were like, so even though we were maybe not so many people, where we had really high budgets to achieve, and we had a lot of independence to achieve these targets, and it was really nice, high flying job. But what also is interesting, once now I'm not doing that anymore, it wasn't that purposeful, let's say. It was very interesting on a personal level, and the work environment was amazing. It was really fun because it was basically a bunch of international people all on a busy buzzing trading floor, and we could basically say, I want this marketing flyer, I want this, and I want this lawyer, and you could like all get all the resources that you needed. So that was interesting. And it's also really interesting for the work I'm doing now, because I would say part of it is kind of lobbying and building relationships and getting, to make this change for lower speed limits. It's about getting a lot of other organizations to ask for the same thing. And so it is about connecting with people, reaching out to them, not being afraid to be rejected, because that's, as a salesperson, that's one of the biggest things you learn. You just like, doesn't matter if people, don't want to talk to you, don't take that personal. And also with this speed campaign, I've reached out to so many organizations, and obviously not everybody comes back to you. Not everybody thinks they should be talking to you. And that's fine. That is completely, I'm not afraid of that. And that's, I'm very used to that, let's say.
So it seems like your corporate work has prepared you well. But one more question. I know you're busting to talk about the organisation, so we will. But just, you had the corporate career. You've obviously met your husband by now. It's a big decision to go from the absolute heart of the financial district of the City of London, the centre of the globe, if you like, and come to not even Sydney, not even Wollongong, but sort of out on the burbs, on the north, an old coal mining town, if you like, on the. Why did you make that move? What caused that move?
Basically, my husband, he always said he wanted to move back to Australia at some stage, and I always said I wanted lots of kids, and then we had 4 kids, and it was And then the Brexit happened, which probably also sped up the whole thing, because with the Brexit, it was pretty clear to me that my job is most likely not going to stay in London. So, having little kids doing that kind of job, it has a lot of sacrifices to it, and, the traveling and so on. And I thought that I thought it was worth it, because I thought there's like a long-term vision that this is going to be an interesting job also in 10 years' time when my kids are bigger. But it was clear, and it actually happened. So the whole team had to move to Frankfurt because of Brexit, because of the Brexit regulation. You just can't do that business from the UK anymore. And moving to Germany with my husband, who doesn't speak German, that was just nothing that was on the cards. So
here you are in Australia,
Yes.
and certainly Australian cycling advocacy schools, I think, are the better for it, for you and your work that you're doing. So now let's talk about those. Let's talk about two specific organisations separately, 30 Please and Safe Streets to School.
Yes.
So let's start with 30 Please. What motivated you to found that organisation?
Drove through my neighbourhood. It's at 50k, but it's actually designed for lower speeds, and it just really confused me. I was like, normally I'm used to drive at the speed limit. That's kind of what my dad told me in Germany. So don't hold up traffic, you drive the speed limit, not over. And then in my neighbourhood was like, it's such a random speed that I'm literally not going to be able to brake if somebody wants. We don't even have footpaths everywhere. So I was like, how is that going to work? So that confused me. And then my husband's friend, they live in this beautiful street, and the kids there in Gerringong, and they play outside, and they make it so they have like swings in the front garden, because they have a garden in front, and he has like one neighbor who speeds through there, and they really struggle with that, because the kids are there, and it's really hard to confront that neighbor to say, oh, can you please drive slower through our neighborhood? Because there's a 50k sign, right? So what do you say, really? You don't really have the law on your back to confront these people. So it creates this tension in neighborhoods. And I thought, I just started to look a little bit more into it. And then I found this webpage from the city of Yarra. It's called Thank You for 30. And they have a lot of research there about why 30 is so good. And I was like, oh, it's interesting, because I've never knew about the research. I obviously grew up in a 30k environment, and I know how that means that, you're just safe there from cars, and it works for cars as well. But, if we never had a problem, also when I drove through there, it doesn't make a difference.
Let's talk about a key part of that research.
The risk of dying when you get hit by a car as a pedestrian, that goes up quite significantly with speed, and that's actually a causal relationship. It's because the kinetic energy that you're exposed to increases with the square of speed. That's probably also because I studied maths. I thought it was quite interesting, something I didn't know before I looked at that. So that means if you get hit at 30k, the risk of dying is 10% or less. But if you get hit at 50k, the risk of dying goes up to 90%. This is data from the Centre of Road Safety from New South Wales. So, you might see slightly different numbers looking at different organizations, but the overall pattern that you get this really big increase of risk over 30k is, you see that in any study, and that won't go away, let's say, because it's physics. It's not something we can do much about. So that's why all the road safety organizations, they all want, it says whenever you mix cars with people walking and cycling, the maximum speed should be 30k, because not only it's very survivable for most instances, but also most accidents won't happen because the driver can just stop in time. So
let's talk about the second organisation, Safe Streets to School.
Yes.
Which came first, and how do the two tie in, and how are they different?
Yes, so 30 Please is a campaign to change the default speed limit in urban areas to 30k. And I co-founded it with academics who have been doing work on this for a long time in Australia. And that is something that probably I would say is more targeted at state and federal level, because that's where you could make these changes, right? The default speed limit is also the most impactful change, because you kind of need to make it consistent. It's not the best idea to say, okay, I'm going to make this street 30k and the next one I'm going to make 50, and then it becomes this confusing thing. safety to school is a little bit different because we, through this work, I met a lot of parents in Wollongong. And in Wollongong, it's such a beautiful city, as you know, for especially with the weather we have and the coastal paths, cycling and walking is just lends itself to it. And a lot of parents don't let their kid walk away to school because there is no crossings on a lot of streets. There is often no footpaths, and drivers also don't really think that they should watch out for kids. It's more the other way around, that kids should watch out for cars, which, is, you don't want your kid to die if they make a mistake. And, people make mistakes, especially children. So that leads to this behavior where we drive our kids to school and then we create more traffic, and then the kids who walk to school, they're even less safe. So it's just, massive kind of problem that we have in the town. We want that our children either have a footpath and a crossing, so they are separated from fast-moving cars, or they, if there's no crossing or if there's no footpath, then we want the speed limit to be 30k or lower. So actually 30k. So that is just a bit different because we can go with that to council, and that is then, telling them the choice is just looking from the children's eye, the children that wants to walk to school. It's just obviously not enough to just make these tiny school zones. It's just really bizarre actually to say, we make this tiny zone around the school safe, and the rest we actually make a 50k sign there so the driver are reminded to speed up once they exit the school zone. So what does it do, so basically, for a lot of people, I think it means, okay, I drive my kid into the safe school zone, and that's actually also where I can cross the street and my kid is not exposed to this fast moving traffic. And then the kids obviously who walk or cycle, they have to go to their home, but the home is in this, street with a high speed limit, no crossing. So what does this do? It just means that a lot of children get driven everywhere. And also in particular in the afternoon, I'm just surprised how completely supervised children are. They're either inside or they're at supervised afternoon activities. That's kind of my experience here. And I think for families who don't have enough money to drive them everywhere, I think that's really sad, that the kids then probably are inside inactive because it's just not normal to just go and play on the street. Some people do it, but we sometimes do it on our street, but I always have an eye out. We can't just trust drivers to slow down for the children. And some people even might think that they shouldn't be there, which is really bizarre because why would they not be there?
Indeed. The concept of streets being just, if you like, traffic sewers, to use some jargon, as opposed to the place where life of the town happens, is only a very new concept in the history of streets, isn't it?
Yes, and obviously, so what we're also saying, obviously, if you have the arterial roads, there, you might want to say, okay, maybe you want to have the cars moving faster than 30k, but then you should provide the proper infrastructure. And so the bike lanes and the footpaths and the crossings, that's definitely where, on arterial road, when you have a lot of cars, you definitely want to have that. But also, thinking more for like a system point of view, if we were actually fixing our local streets with a lower speed limits, then we could also really have more like a strategy to spend our money and energy on fixing up the arterial roads for cycling and walking more. But, not having that kind of concept of using lower speed limit just makes it kind of overwhelming to trying to think about how we're gonna create this connected cycling network in
So you've got
Australia.
your two organisations with similar, related asks, but slightly different organisations. Two questions. How's it been going so far?
Yeah.
And how long do you think it's going to take to achieve the results that you want to see?
Well, it's actually so interesting because this is such a open door kind of campaign, I find, because most people in policy who have spent more than 5 minutes looking at evidence with an open eye, and also looking, for example, at travel times, because I think some people are like, oh my God, that's going to cost us so much time. And then you look at it and you're like, well, it's only the local streets. It's the streets where cars don't spend much time. So it has minimal impact and has massive outcomes for walking and cycling, which could reduce congestion, this kind of thing. So, you know, any kind of expert kind of gets it pretty fast. And also a lot of politicians, actually, they understand that would be something that we could do right away. That's not expensive, and that would make everything cheaper that we want to achieve, because a lot of infrastructure for pedestrians is so expensive, like a big fence. You need that because cars go so fast. There's no need for a big fence or like a massive bridge if you slow down the...
So if the experts get it,
yes,
and a lot of the politicians get it, why isn't it happening? What are the main barriers?
Yes. So I think Australians are relatively conflict averse. So I don't think people are very, compared to growing up in Germany, it's completely different when you go to school, because the German schools are all about most teachers, they want you to teach you how to use your voice so the Holocaust doesn't happen again. That's basically, I think, the motivation of any history teacher in life I ever had. It's basically such a mainstream thing. And so you're always kind of encouraged to think for yourself, challenge the status quo and speak up if something isn't right. And I find that is here. I've met some amazing advocates, including yourself, but it's not necessarily something that, people are not so, asking lower speed limits, or ask something from somebody. So this sounds a bit, you have to actually, maybe take away somebody's freedom, which you don't. But I think that's what people feel. They're feel uncomfortable to say that. And I think because when you look at the community support, it's actually really high. The Heart Foundation did a study about what Australia wants, and the majority of Australians support lower speed limits in neighborhoods. But they are not necessarily the outspoken ones. They are not, that passionate about it that they're going to go on the streets. So I think politicians are just very much thinking about, what's the status quo, and changing the status quo is always hard, needs a lot of political leadership. And I think we were just maybe also a little bit unlucky that we didn't really have that kind of leadership that you need, that somebody is this is maybe not so easy to explain, but sometimes when we value something like children's freedom, I think actually all the Australians, I know, they value children's freedom, and they value independence and activity for children. And sometimes when we value things, we also have to change things to maintain it. And that in this case, the speed limits in German neighborhoods and in Sweden and in Holland, they were changed 40 years ago. And then we didn't see that what happened here in Australia. I think we have now 4 times the amount of cars than in the 70s. And not much has been done for children that they can navigate that situation. So actually the Center for Road Safety just says, you should hold your kid's hand until they're 10 years old. And the complete opposite happens in German messaging, for example.
That's pretty tricky for you with 4 kids and 2 hands.
Exactly. How do you ride bikes with your kids if you have to hold their hands? How do you physical cross the street if you're supposed to hold the kid's hand until they're 10 years old? And that's the New South Wales Center for Road Safety. So I think it's really poor to say, okay, we find it too hard to fix the streets for kids. So as a result, we want you to, hold their hands. Is that really all we can do? I think, that's why I think it needs that leadership, that we just do it and make it safe, And, as I said, in Germany, my nephew, he is 7, so he walks to school unsupervised. It's actually quite far, for 15 minutes or 20 minutes a day. And before kids start school, the parents are all invited, and the police comes and the school comes, and the parents, they are told, your kid should walk to school by themselves. You have to practice with them, because if you over parent them and over supervise them, they are not gonna be good in traffic, and they are not gonna reach their milestone. And so it's a complete opposite messaging,
So it's a huge contrast to Australia.
Completely. It's very different how society pushes parents to actually let go and encourage that independence. But obviously, in return as well, the streets are so much safer. When I grew up in the 80s, my streets were already so much safer for me than what I see now here for my children. So it goes together. It's not the one thing.
So if anyone's watching this and they think, gee, I would like Australia to be a little bit more like Germany or perhaps other neighbouring countries, what should they be doing about it? What would you advise someone to actually do?
Yes, so Safe Streets to School, I think, so we have a petition and we have it for different councils. So, that's, I think, a very effective way to influence councils. It's because if you start that, like a chapter in a new council, or if you join ours, then you can speak on behalf of the group. And that's very, very powerful for advocacy, that you don't just, not just everybody speaking for themselves. And we have all the material, so it's really simple to do that. And advocacy in general, that's what we do a lot as well, is trying to get a lot of organizations behind it. So it's not just, one person says, and I want more bike lanes, and somebody else says, I want this. But we all can agree, we all want these lower speed limits. And I think then we have more of a chance to make it happen. And we should also really say 30K, because there is this tendency, some people say like, we should do 40K. And it's like, well, you have such a poor infrastructure for walking and cycling, really, in international comparison with other rich countries. It's like, it's such a lack of everything. And the other countries, they go for 30, and then we think we should do 40. So how would that make any sense? Because that means if you go 40, that means you still need the infrastructure. You still need to separate. So why would we want to go for that? Because it is a change, and people who don't like lower speed limits, I think, they're going to be unhappy about 40 or 30K.
So you might as well go the whole hog and do it properly, is what you're saying.
Like, it's actually a mandate by the United Nations. It's not just, and I don't even understand how, the United Nations mandates it. And then, in Australia, we kind of put it out there in the policies, but then we don't implement it.
Yeah.
And what does it actually mean when a child dies in traffic? Does that mean that the child is just responsible themselves, or does it mean that the policies are not correct? Don't we think we should save these lives?
So you've been working really hard on this, putting in a lot of time.
Yes.
And have you found that mentally or physically draining to be fighting against such entrenched values and vested interests? How do you cope with that?
No, I actually really like it. It's actually really the nicest people I work with and I meet through this work, really inspiring people. And I think it's very purposeful, and it would have, amazing outcomes if it happens. And I can also see how, we also, for example, got money from the New South Wales government for a small pilot here in Wollongong for a slowdown day. So it's obviously a very small step to do, to get to this big vision. But you can see that there is, interest, and I think people are really thinking about it on the government level, but also other organizations. How can we make this happen? So I think we are getting closer to it.
Okay, so we're getting closer.
Yes.
Have you given yourself a time frame to keep doing this work full time before you go back to the corporate world, or do you think you're in this for the long haul? What's your thoughts on that?
I think I find it actually really rewarding to do, because I can see how, also by how many, politicians and policy advisors, not just advisor, policy people and other organizations talk to us. I find it really rewarding, and I think it's actually really important that this lobbying, you could call it lobbying if it was for profit. It's not, so it's advocacy, but it's such an important thing to do, and there's obviously not many people in my position have that privilege to be able to give their time for such a cause, and it's nice to be able to do it. So I completely enjoy it. I hope obviously we get there rather sooner than later, just also out of self-interest for, my kids. I don't want my kids to, be, like get hit by a car. It's just something I worry about more than a lot of other things, just looking at the stats in Australia.
Only natural that any mother would think that, or any father, or anyone.
Yes. But I also don't want to steal their independence. Like I'm pretty big on that. And for example, in COVID, I thought it was timing-wise such a, our neighbors, they said to us, "Oh, does your daughter want to go cycling with my son? They're 9 to along the cafe and then to the plane." I was like, "Yes," and they initiated, and that's this group of 9-year-olds. They just cycled around and got an ice cream, and I thought, "Oh, that is so great! I'm so grateful for that she can experience that." Because it's part of growing up, and I don't want to delay that for.
So that COVID time with the lockdowns and kids riding everywhere, it was sort of almost like a vision to the future. But let's finish with a vision to the future. Imagine it's 2030.
Yes.
What do you want to see? We're teleporting to 2030. We've got out of the TARDIS and we're looking around where you live right now.
Yes.
And broader Australia. What's your vision? What would you like to see?
So basically I want all the people who want to walk and ride to have the option to do so and be safe while they do so. So, and for me, that means that, probably 80% of streets should be 30K, and we probably don't do much more, probably puts just the technology in the car so cars can actually speed. That's something else I'm really passionate about, because there is technology already mandatory in the EU for new cars where you literally can't exceed the speed limit. And I think that is so much more cost efficient than trying or saying, "Oh, we have to fix all the neighborhoods up." And that's a lot of, that's often what people say. They say, "Oh, no, we have to completely redesign the streets and then we could make them slower." And then obviously, but that's going to cost like billions and billions.
So 80% of the roads 30Ks now.
Yes.
Cars that are speed governed.
Yes.
To stay within the limit.
Yeah.
Any other key, if
and
you
then
could pick one or two things.
On the other roads, I would really like to see bike lanes, crossings, and footpaths. And I think that would give people the option, and I think it would be something people would probably, because I saw it in the lockdown, right? It's that you're having the option. If you have a lockdown, you have low traffic neighborhoods. So having less cars, that helps tremendously. But just by reducing the speed, I think we get there. And I saw it also in the holiday parks, actually.
Yeah.
I thought it was, for me, the most amazing thing. I didn't just work for a year, and then we went to a holiday park in Lake Conjola, and then all of a sudden, there were kids from 5 years old, unsupervised, outside, riding their bike, everybody out of the bus. And my husband, he drove probably 20K in this holiday park, and somebody else came to him and said, "You have to slow down here, it's 10K." And I was like, wow, this is exactly how we could have it in our neighborhoods, because they are very similar in a lot of ways to these holiday parks. It's just the last mile. You don't even have to go to 10K. We could go 3 times faster and we still get a similar environment. And in Australia, people pay for the privilege to go to a holiday park, and then they just let their kid go free. So this kind of free range childhood that kids in the Netherlands, for example, in particular, is the number 1 country for kids' happiness is the Netherlands, right? And that's the kind of childhood they have. And we have this here in a holiday park, and that's purely because we, slow down cars and we watch out for kids.
So we need to turn Australia into a giant holiday park.
In a way, obviously we don't have to go as slow. We could still go 3 times faster. So that still works. But I think that is a good way to grow up, to just, be able to go out and about. And then also, in a holiday park, that was striking, because you're surrounded by complete strangers, and there you let your kid go wild and free and don't supervise. But then you go to your neighborhood where you have, people you actually know, and there you're worried about, and people tell you about being worried about strangers. And it's just, why? That's probably not it. I do think that the choice that we made to choose cars over children, that's probably where we have to really think about if we really want to leave it like that. And I don't think people want that, actually. I really don't think they want it.
No, I don't think so either. And I think you're doing really valuable work, Lena.
Thank you.
So thank you for being an influencer.
Thank you so much.